In the shadowed halls of Valdoria's ancient palace, where golden tapestries hide centuries of secrets, a single phone call would unravel a conspiracy that threatened to destroy the monarchy forever. Guard Captain Elena Marquez never imagined that her routine security check would expose a web of betrayal reaching the highest echelons of power. What she discovered in those stolen moments would force her to choose between loyalty to the crown. Part 1. The grandfather clock in the West Wing chimed midnight as Captain Elena Marquez completed her final rounds through the Palace of Valdoria. 23 years of service had taught her to notice the smallest details. A door left slightly ajar, an unusual shadow, the faint scent of expensive perfume lingering where it shouldn't be. Tonight something felt different. Elena paused outside the Queen Mother's private study, her hand instinctively moving to the radio clipped to her uniform. The ornate mahogany door, which should have been locked and secured hours ago, stood open just enough to reveal a sliver of warm lamplight within. Her pulse quickened. Protocol dictated that all royal chambers be sealed by 10 o'clock, and the Queen Mother, Duchess Isabella Corvelli, had retired to her chambers at 9:30 sharp, as she had every night for the past decade. The palace had been unusually tense lately. Rumors swirled through the servant quarters about young Prince Alexander's upcoming military commission. At 19, the heir apparent was scheduled to begin his service with the Royal Navy in just 3 weeks, a tradition that had remained unbroken in the Valdorian monarchy for over 2 centuries. But whispers suggested that not everyone in the inner circle supported this time-honored custom. Elena approached the door with practiced silence, her trained ear catching the low murmur of voices from within. She recognized the first voice immediately. The crisp, aristocratic tones of Duchess Isabella, the prince's grandmother and the most influential member of the royal family after King Marcus himself. But it was the second voice that made Elena's blood run cold. Lord Chancellor Dmitri Vasquez, the king's most trusted advisor and childhood friend, spoke in hushed, urgent tones that carried an edge of desperation Elena had never heard before. She pressed herself against the marble wall beside the doorframe, knowing that what she was about to hear could change everything. "The boy cannot be allowed to serve," Isabella's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You know as well as I do what happened to his father at that age. The Navy nearly killed Marcus before he could claim his throne properly. Alexander is different, more sensitive, more thoughtful. The rigors of military service will break him. Your Majesty, with respect, tradition demands," Dmitri began, but Isabella's sharp intake of breath silenced him. "Tradition be damned," she hissed. "I've spent 19 years grooming that boy to be a king worthy of our legacy. I won't watch the Navy turn him into a hollow shell like they did his father. You've seen how Marcus struggles with decision-making, how he freezes when faced with real conflict. The military strips away everything royal about a person and leaves behind a soldier. Alexander was born to rule, not to follow orders." Elena felt her world tilting. The Queen Mother's words bordered on treason. Questioning the king's fitness to rule was a crime punishable by exile, if not worse. But more troubling was the cold calculation in Isabella's voice, as if she had already decided Alexander's fate without regard for his own wishes or the ancient laws that governed their kingdom. "What exactly are you proposing?" Dmitri asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabella's laugh was devoid of warmth. "You're going to help me ensure Alexander never sets foot on a naval vessel. There are ways to make a person unavailable for service. A timely illness, perhaps. A minor injury that requires extended recovery. Or maybe a diplomatic crisis that requires the prince's immediate attention elsewhere." "Isabella, what you're suggesting is necessary," she interrupted sharply. "Do you think I've maintained influence in this kingdom for 30 years by being sentimental? Alexander is the future of Valdoria, and I refuse to let outdated traditions jeopardize everything we've built. His military service is scheduled to begin in 3 weeks. That gives us time to implement a solution." Elena's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, switching it to silent mode. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to pretend she had never heard this conversation. But her oath as a palace guard bound her to protect not just the royal family's physical safety, but the integrity of the monarchy itself. If Isabella was planning to circumvent royal protocol through deception, or worse, Elena had a duty to stop her. She activated her phone's recording function, knowing that audio evidence would be crucial if this conspiracy went deeper than just one conversation. The device's memory was nearly full from her daughter's school photos, but she quickly deleted several files to make room. This could be the most important recording in Valdorian history. The king must never know, Isabella continued. Marcus is too bound by tradition and honor to understand the pragmatic choices required for effective leadership. He still believes in fairy tales about duty and service-building character, but I've watched this kingdom closely for decades, Dmitri. The strongest rulers are those who've never been broken down and rebuilt by military discipline. They retain their natural authority, their instinct for command. And if Alexander discovers what we've done? Dmitri asked. He won't, Isabella replied with chilling certainty. The boy trusts me completely. He tells me everything, his fears, his hopes, his doubts about the military service. He's already expressed concerns about leaving the kingdom for so long, about missing important developments in his royal education. It won't be difficult to convince him that avoiding service is actually his own idea. Elena pressed the phone closer to the door crack, ensuring clear audio quality. The conversation had taken on the characteristics of a full conspiracy now, with Isabella outlining her manipulation of the prince's emotions and Dmitri being drawn deeper into her web of deception. You realize that if this becomes public knowledge, it could destroy the monarchy's credibility, Dmitri said, though his voice had lost its earlier resistance. Only if it becomes public knowledge, Isabella responded coldly, which is why I'm trusting you to handle this with the same discretion you've shown in other delicate matters we've managed together over the years. The implication in her words sent a chill through Elena. How many other delicate matters had these two conspired to manage? How long had they been operating behind the king's back, shaping royal policy through manipulation and deceit? The prince's doctor, physician royal Sebastian Torres, has always been cooperative when the family's interests require creative medical interpretations, Isabella continued. A consultation revealing a previously undetected heart murmur could delay military service indefinitely, while specialists conduct extensive testing. By the time they conclude he's perfectly healthy, Alexander will have aged out of the traditional service period. Elena realized she was witnessing the formation of a conspiracy that involved not just the Queen Mother and Lord Chancellor, but potentially the royal physician as well. The web of deception was larger than she had imagined, reaching into multiple crucial positions within the palace hierarchy. What about General Rodriguez? Dmitri asked, referencing the head of Valdorian military forces. He's been personally overseeing the prince's service preparations. He'll ask questions if Alexander suddenly develops health complications. General Rodriguez is a soldier, Isabella replied dismissively. He follows orders and accepts official medical documentation without question. Besides, he's always been more concerned with military readiness than court politics. As long as the proper paperwork is filed and protocols are followed, he won't investigate further. Elena's mind raced as she continued recording. The conspiracy was becoming clearer with each exchanged word. Isabella had identified key players and planned to manipulate each one through their professional vulnerabilities. The royal physician's willingness to bend medical ethics for the royal family, the general's respect for official documentation, Dmitri's history of handling delicate matters, all of it pointed to a sophisticated understanding of palace dynamics and human psychology. There's one more consideration, Isabella said, her voice taking on an even more serious tone. The people of Valdoria have certain expectations about their future king. Military service has always been seen as a rite of passage that proves royal commitment to defending the realm. If Alexander avoids service through obvious manipulation, it could damage public trust in his eventual reign. Then how do you propose to manage public perception? Dmitri asked. Isabella's answer revealed the full scope of her political cunning. We frame the situation as Alexander making a personal sacrifice for the good of the kingdom. Perhaps a crisis emerges that requires his immediate attention, unrest in the northern provinces, or a diplomatic emergency with our neighbors. The prince heroically chooses to delay his military service to serve his country in a different capacity. The public sees leadership and dedication, rather than avoidance of duty. Elena realized that Isabella wasn't just planning to manipulate the immediate situation. She was orchestrating a complete narrative that would protect Alexander's reputation while achieving her goal of preventing his military service. The sophistication of the plan suggested this wasn't her first time engineering such a deception. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Isabella and Dmitri discussing specific timelines, potential complications, and contingency plans. Elena recorded every word, her phone's memory filling with evidence that could expose the conspiracy and protect Prince Alexander from manipulation he wasn't even aware of experiencing. As the voices began to quiet, indicating the meeting was concluding, Elena carefully made her way back down the corridor, her mind spinning with the implications of what she had just witnessed. She had stumbled upon a plot that threatened not just royal tradition, but the very foundations of honest governance that the Valdorian monarchy had been built upon. Back in her small office in the guard quarters, Elena sat staring at her phone, knowing that the recording she had just made contained enough evidence to destroy some of the most powerful people in the kingdom. But it also contained enough truth to save Prince Alexander from a deception that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The question now was what to do with this dangerous knowledge. Approaching the king directly would put her in the position of accusing his mother and closest advisor of treason. Remaining silent would make her complicit in a conspiracy against royal tradition and the prince's own autonomy. Either choice would change her life forever. As dawn approached, Elena made the first of many difficult decisions that would define the coming weeks. She encrypted the recording file and created multiple backup copies, storing them in secure locations both within and outside the palace. Whatever happened next, the truth would be preserved, but preservation and revelation were two very different things. And Elena was beginning to understand that she held the power to either save or destroy the Valdorian monarchy with a single decision about whether to remain silent or speak the truth that could shake the very foundations of the kingdom she had sworn to protect. Part 2. 3 days had passed since Elena's discovery, and the palace buzzed with unusual activity. Prince Alexander moved through his daily routines with a subtle change in demeanor that only someone watching closely would notice. During morning briefings with his tutors, he asked more questions about diplomatic protocols and fewer about military strategy. His afternoon riding sessions, typically vigorous exercises that prepared him for naval service, had become leisurely tours of the palace gardens where he engaged in lengthy conversations with visiting dignitaries. Elena observed these changes from her security posts throughout the palace, recognizing Isabella's influence at work. The Queen Mother had begun implementing her plan with remarkable efficiency, gradually steering Alexander's interests away from military service toward what she presented as more sophisticated forms of royal duty. On Thursday morning, Elena was assigned to accompany Prince Alexander during his weekly meeting with General Rodriguez in the war room. The oak-paneled chamber, lined with portraits of Valdorian military heroes, had always intimidated Elena with its atmosphere of solemn duty and sacrifice. Today, it felt like a stage where Isabella's manipulation would play out in real time. General Rodriguez, a weathered man in his 60s whose uniform displayed decades of service ribbons, stood when Alexander entered. His respect for royal tradition was evident in every precise movement, and Elena knew he had no idea he was about to become an unwitting participant in the Queen Mother's conspiracy. "Your Highness," the general began formally, "I've prepared the final preparation schedule for your naval commission. The HMS Valdorian Pride will be ready for your arrival in 18 days. Captain Morrison has arranged quarters appropriate for your rank and has personally selected the crew members who will serve during your training period." Alexander shifted uncomfortably in his chair, a reaction that would have been barely noticeable a week earlier, but now seemed amplified. Elena recognized the signs of internal conflict. The prince was genuinely torn between his grandmother's influence and his own sense of duty. "General, I've been thinking about the timing. Alexander said carefully. Given the current political climate, particularly the trade negotiations with our eastern neighbors, wouldn't it be more valuable for me to remain at court during the next several months? My father has mentioned that my presence during diplomatic sessions has been beneficial. Elena felt sick as she watched Isabella's words coming from Alexander's mouth. The Queen Mother had coached him perfectly, teaching him to present her agenda as his own reasoned conclusion. The prince genuinely believed he was making an independent decision based on mature consideration of royal responsibilities. General Rodriguez frowned slightly, his military training making him sensitive to any deviation from established protocol. Your Highness, with respect, diplomatic experience is certainly valuable. However, military service has been an essential component of royal education for over 2 centuries. Your great-grandfather distinguished himself during his naval service in the Continental War. Your grandfather earned commendation for his submarine command during the Northern Conflict. And your father, despite the challenges he faced, completed his full term of service with honor. The reference to King Marcus's difficult military experience made Alexander wince visibly. Elena realized that Isabella had likely filled her grandson's head with exaggerated stories about his father's struggles, using the king's own experiences as ammunition against the family tradition. Perhaps, Alexander said hesitantly, there are other ways to demonstrate commitment to defending Valdoria. What if I spent the same time period working directly with our intelligence services, or training with our diplomatic security teams? I could gain valuable experience while remaining available for royal duties. Elena watched General Rodriguez's face carefully, seeing the exact moment when suspicion began to form in his weathered features. The general had served long enough to recognize political maneuvering, and Alexander's sudden reversal on military service after months of enthusiastic preparation raised obvious red flags. Your Highness, the general said slowly, has someone expressed concerns about your military service? Your enthusiasm for naval duty has been evident throughout your preparation period. This change in perspective seems rather sudden. Alexander's hesitation confirmed Elena's fears. The prince was struggling to explain his new position because he didn't fully understand it himself. Isabella's manipulation had been subtle enough that Alexander believed his doubts were natural developments rather than carefully planted suggestions. I've simply been thinking more deeply about how I can best serve Valdoria, Alexander replied, but his voice lacked conviction. My grandmother has helped me understand that there are many forms of service, and perhaps remaining at court during these crucial months would benefit the kingdom more than traditional military training. The mention of Isabella made General Rodriguez's expression harden almost imperceptibly. Elena saw recognition dawn in his eyes. He understood exactly what was happening, even if he couldn't prove it. The Queen Mother's reputation for behind-the-scenes influence was well known among long-serving palace staff. I see, the general said carefully. Well, Your Highness, such a significant change would require formal approval from His Majesty the King. Military commissions, especially for members of the royal family, cannot be cancelled or postponed without official documentation and reasoning. Elena felt a surge of relief. General Rodriguez was forcing the conspiracy into the open, requiring King Marcus's direct involvement in any decision to cancel Alexander's service. Isabella would have to convince her son to overturn centuries of tradition or find another way to achieve her goal. After Alexander left the war room, Elena lingered, pretending to check security protocols while actually observing General Rodriguez's reaction. The old soldier sat heavily in his chair, staring at the portraits of royal military heroes with troubled eyes. Captain Marquez, he said without looking at her, in your security role, you observe many private conversations and interactions. Elena's heart rate spiked. Yes, sir. Professional discretion is essential to effective protection. Indeed, the general mused. And I imagine that discretion sometimes puts you in difficult positions when you observe things that concern the kingdom's welfare. The weight of his words hit Elena like a physical blow. General Rodriguez suspected that palace staff might have knowledge about Isabella's influence, but he couldn't directly ask without overstepping his authority. He was testing whether Elena might be willing to share information if it served the kingdom's interests. "Sir, my primary duty is protecting the royal family," Elena replied carefully. "Of course," Rodriguez said, finally turning to face her. "But protection takes many forms, doesn't it? Sometimes protecting someone means preventing them from making mistakes they don't realize they're making." Elena understood that she was being offered an opportunity, a chance to find an ally in exposing Isabella's conspiracy without directly approaching the king herself. General Rodriguez had the authority and credibility to investigate irregularities in royal military service, and his loyalty to tradition was unquestionable. "General, if someone hypothetically possessed information about irregularities in palace decision-making processes, what would be the appropriate channels for reporting such concerns?" Rodriguez studied her face intently, reading between the lines of her carefully worded question. "Hypothetically, such information would need to be presented through proper security channels, with documentation sufficient to support any claims. Accusations against senior royal family members require extraordinary evidence." With trust steady, Elena nodded, understanding that she had just received both an invitation and a warning. Rodriguez was willing to listen to what she had discovered, but only if she could provide concrete proof of the conspiracy she had witnessed. That evening, Elena made her second crucial decision. She contacted General Rodriguez through Secure Palace Communications, requesting a private meeting to discuss security concerns related to royal protection protocols. The coded language would allow them to meet officially without raising suspicions among palace staff who might report back to Isabella or Dmitri. They met at dawn in the palace armory, a location that provided both privacy and a legitimate reason for a security captain to consult with the military commander. Elena arrived with her phone and a portable speaker, her hands shaking slightly as she prepared to reveal the conspiracy that could destroy the monarchy, or save it depending on how Rodriguez chose to respond. "General, what I'm about to share with you was obtained during routine security rounds," she began formally. "I discovered this information by accident, but I believe it represents a serious threat to royal autonomy and traditional governance protocols." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Proceed, Captain." Elena played the recording, watching the general's face transform from professional attention to shocked disbelief to cold anger as Isabella's voice filled the armory with details of her planned deception. When Dimitri's voice joined the conspiracy, Rodriguez's hands clenched into fists. When the recording ended, silence stretched between them for several long minutes. Elena knew that Rodriguez was processing not just the immediate conspiracy, but its broader implications for everything he had spent his career protecting and defending. "How many copies of this recording exists?" he asked finally. "Multiple secure copies," Elena replied. "I understand the sensitivity of this information." Rodriguez stood and paced the length of the armory, his military bearing rigid with controlled fury. "Captain Marquez, what you've uncovered represents treason against royal tradition, manipulation of a member of the royal family, and conspiracy to defraud military service obligations. This isn't just a family disagreement. This is an attack on the fundamental principles that govern our monarchy." Elena felt validation and terror in equal measure. Having her suspicions confirmed by someone of Rodriguez's stature meant she had been right to preserve the evidence, but it also meant the conspiracy was even more serious than she had initially understood. "What are our options, General?" she asked. Rodriguez turned to face her, his expression grave. "We have 3 choices, each with potentially catastrophic consequences. We can approach His Majesty directly with this evidence, risking a family crisis that could tear apart the royal household. We can confront the Queen Mother and Lord Chancellor privately, hoping to convince them to abandon their plan voluntarily. Or we can work covertly to counter their conspiracy while gathering additional evidence of their activities." Elena realized that her discovery had initiated a chain of events that would require careful navigation to protect both the truth and the monarchy itself. The next few weeks would determine whether justice or family loyalty would prevail in the ancient halls of the Palace of Valdoria. "General," Elena said quietly, "there's something else. During my security rounds over the past 3 days, I've observed additional conversations between the Queen Mother and various palace staff. I believe this conspiracy may be larger than just the military service issue. Rodriguez's eyes sharpened with new concern. What kind of conversations? Elena took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would expand their investigation far beyond what either of them had initially imagined. Conversations about controlling Prince Alexander's access to information, limiting his interaction with certain advisors, and gradually isolating him from influences that might contradict the Queen Mother's guidance. Sir, I think we're looking at something much more comprehensive than preventing military service. I think we're looking at an attempt to control the future king's entire worldview and decision-making process. Part 3. The revelation that Isabella's conspiracy extended far beyond military service transformed Elena and General Rodriguez's investigation into something approaching a counterintelligence operation. With the following week, they developed a careful surveillance plan that would allow them to document the full scope of the Queen Mother's influence without alerting their targets. Elena used her security clearance to access visitor logs, communication records, and staff scheduling information, building a comprehensive picture of Isabella's activities. What she discovered was both impressive and terrifying in its sophistication. The Queen Mother had spent years cultivating relationships with key palace staff, creating a network of influence that touched nearly every aspect of Prince Alexander's daily life. Dr. Sebastian Torres, the royal physician, had been meeting privately with Isabella twice monthly for the past year, always scheduling these consultations as routine health briefings that wouldn't appear suspicious in official records. Elena obtained copies of these appointment logs through the medical office's administrative assistant, a young woman who assumed Elena's request was part of routine security verification. Lord Chamberlain Marcus Delgado, responsible for managing Alexander's schedule and social interactions, had been gradually limiting the prince's exposure to military officials, foreign diplomats with strong defense backgrounds, and even certain members of the nobility known for their traditional views on royal duty. Elena discovered this pattern by cross-referencing Alexander's schedule changes over the past 6 months with the backgrounds and political positions of canceled or redirected meetings. Even more troubling was Isabella's influence over Alexander's educational curriculum. Professor Elena Vasquez, who directed the prince's continuing education in political science and history, had been subtly adjusting reading assignments and discussion topics to emphasize diplomatic leadership over military command, civilian governance over warrior traditions, and modern political theory over historical precedent. Elena presented these findings to General Rodriguez during their second clandestine meeting in the palace chapel, a location that provided both privacy and symbolic appropriateness for their discussion of moral duty versus family loyalty. "The pattern is clear," Rodriguez said grimly as he reviewed Elena's documentation. "The Queen Mother isn't just trying to prevent military service, she's attempting to fundamentally reshape how Prince Alexander understands his role as future king." This represents a complete subversion of royal education traditions. Elena nodded, pointing to her timeline analysis. "Look at the coordination, General. Every change has been implemented gradually over months, with each staff member believing they were responding to routine requests or minor adjustments. Isabella has been careful to ensure that no single person could see the full pattern of manipulation." Rodriguez studied the documents with the tactical analysis skills that had served him throughout his military career. This level of systematic influence represents a serious threat to the monarchy's traditional foundation. If Alexander becomes king, having never experienced military discipline, never learned to trust military advisors, never understood the warrior heritage that has defined Valdorian leadership for centuries, he'll be completely dependent on civilian advisors and susceptible to exactly the kind of political manipulation his grandmother has been conditioning him to accept, Elena finished. "She's not just preventing his military service, she's grooming him to be the kind of king who will defer to her judgment on fundamental matters of governance." The implications struck both of them with full force. Isabella wasn't planning a temporary intervention in Alexander's life. She was engineering a permanent transformation that would affect his entire reign. The military service issue was simply the most immediate and visible component of a much larger scheme. We need additional evidence, Rodriguez decided. Approach His Majesty with accusations this serious, and we need documentation that proves intent and coordination, not just circumstantial patterns. Elena had been anticipating this requirement. General, I believe the Queen Mother and Lord Chancellor meet regularly to coordinate their activities. If we could record one of their planning sessions, we might obtain the comprehensive evidence we need. Rodriguez considered this carefully. Such surveillance would be extremely risky, Captain. If we're discovered, our careers and reputations will be destroyed regardless of our motivations. Are you prepared for that possibility? Elena thought about Prince Alexander, remembering his genuine enthusiasm for military service before Isabella's subtle campaign began undermining his confidence and redirecting his interests. She thought about the centuries of Valdorian tradition that had produced strong, principled leaders who understood both the privileges and responsibilities of power. Most importantly, she thought about the kind of king Alexander could become if he were allowed to develop his own understanding of duty rather than accepting his grandmother's manipulated version. Yes, sir, I'm prepared for that risk. They spent the remainder of their meeting planning a surveillance operation that would capture Isabella and Dmitri in the act of coordinating their conspiracy. Elena would use her security access to plant recording devices in the Queen Mother's private study, the location where most of their sensitive conversations seemed to occur. Rodriguez would monitor palace schedules to identify optimal timing for their operation. 2 days later, their opportunity arrived. King Marcus was scheduled to attend a 3-day agricultural summit in the eastern provinces, taking several key staff members with him and leaving the palace with reduced oversight. Isabella and Dmitri typically used such absences to conduct their most sensitive planning discussions, assuming correctly that fewer people would be present to observe their activities. 7:88 p.m. at Akota Bennett's PSD. With Trust Teddy, Elena executed the surveillance installation during her regular midnight security rounds, placing tiny recording devices in strategic locations around Isabella's study. The technology was standard security equipment used for monitoring public areas of the palace, but Elena had requisitioned devices specifically designed for covert operations. The following evening, Isabella and Dmitri met as expected. Elena monitored the recording from her security office, listening as their conversation confirmed and expanded upon everything she and Rodriguez had already discovered. Alexander's transformation has exceeded my expectations, Isabella reported with satisfaction. Dr. 5. Torres confirmed yesterday that the prince expressed genuine concerns about the physical demands of naval service. He asked specifically about potential career-ending injuries and the long-term effects of maritime duty on royal health. The seeds of doubt we've planted are growing naturally. And his academic focus? Dmitri inquired. Professor Vasquez reports excellent progress. Alexander is becoming genuinely interested in diplomatic history and civilian governance models. Last week, he spent 3 hours discussing trade negotiations with the southern kingdoms, showing none of his previous restlessness when topics drift away from military matters. He's discovering intellectual satisfaction in areas that will serve our long-term goals. Elena felt sick as she listened to them discuss Alexander's psychological manipulation as if it were a successful academic project. The prince's genuine intellectual curiosity was being weaponized against his own autonomy, with each new interest carefully cultivated to serve Isabella's agenda. What about resistance from General Rodriguez? Isabella asked. I understand he questioned Alexander directly about the military service delays. Rodriguez is a problem, Dmitri admitted. He's too experienced to accept sudden changes in royal protocol without suspicion. However, he's also bound by military discipline and respect for royal authority. As long as we manage the situation carefully and avoid giving him grounds for formal objection, his suspicions alone won't threaten our plans. Isabella's laugh contained no warmth, General Rodriguez represents the old way of thinking, the belief that breaking people down and rebuilding them creates strong leaders. I've studied the effects of military service on royal family members for decades, Dmitri. It creates followers, not leaders. It instills respect for chain of command rather than confidence in personal authority. Alexander needs to learn to trust his own judgment, not defer to military protocols. Elena realized that Isabella genuinely believed her manipulation was beneficial for Alexander and the kingdom. The Queen Mother had convinced herself that traditional royal education was actually harmful, that centuries of successful leadership had occurred despite military service rather than because of it. This wasn't mere political maneuvering. It was ideological warfare against the fundamental principles of Valdorian governance. The timeline remains crucial, Isabella continued. Alexander's commission is still scheduled for 2 weeks from today. Dr. Torres is prepared to discover a heart irregularity that will require extensive testing, but we need to ensure the timing appears natural rather than convenient.
How will you handle King Marcus? Dmitri asked.
He'll demand detailed medical explanations and want second opinions from military physicians. Marcus trusts his mother and his closest advisor, Isabella replied confidently. When we present a united front explaining that Alexander's health concerns require delaying military service, he'll accept our recommendation. Marcus has never been comfortable making decisions that contradict family consensus, especially when those decisions affect his son's safety. Elena understood that Isabella was planning to exploit King Marcus's paternal instincts and his respect for family harmony to gain approval for their deception. The king's genuine love for his son would be used against both of them. The conversation continued for another hour, covering contingency plans, potential complications, and long-term strategies for maintaining Alexander's dependency on Isabella's guidance. Elena recorded every word, building a comprehensive record of the conspiracy's scope and sophistication. When the meeting ended, Elena immediately created multiple copies of the new recording and combined them with her previous evidence into a comprehensive file that documented the full extent of Isabella's manipulation. The evidence was now overwhelming and irrefutable. The next morning, she met with General Rodriguez in the palace archives, a location that provided privacy while appearing routine for someone researching security protocols. "General, we now have complete documentation of their conspiracy," Elena reported, providing him with copies of all recordings and supporting evidence. This goes far beyond preventing military service. They're attempting to fundamentally alter how Prince Alexander understands leadership, authority, and royal responsibility. Rodriguez reviewed the material with growing alarm. "Captain, this evidence proves that the Queen Mother and Lord Chancellor are actively working to undermine centuries of royal tradition and manipulate the future king's psychological development. This isn't just inappropriate, it's treasonous." Elena nodded gravely. "What's our next step?" Rodriguez was quiet for several minutes, weighing their options against the potentially catastrophic consequences of each possible action. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a career spent serving the monarchy's deepest principles. "We present this evidence to His Majesty immediately upon his return from the agricultural summit. The king must know what's being done to his son and his kingdom, regardless of the personal cost to his family relationships. The monarchy's integrity takes precedence over individual comfort or convenience." Elena felt relief and terror in equal measure. They had committed to a course of action that would expose the conspiracy and protect Alexander from manipulation, but the personal and political fallout would be devastating for everyone involved. "General, there's one more consideration," Elena said carefully. "Once we reveal this to the king, the Queen Mother and Lord Chancellor will know that someone has been surveilling their private conversations. They'll launch an investigation to identify how their conspiracy was discovered." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Captain, we both understood when we began this investigation that exposure was inevitable. Our duty to the crown and to Prince Alexander requires us to accept whatever consequences follow from doing what's right." As they prepared to confront King Marcus with evidence that would shatter his family and potentially save his kingdom, Elena realized that she had moved far beyond her role as a simple security guard. She had become a guardian of truth and tradition, risking everything to protect the monarchy from those who would manipulate it for personal gain. The next phase of their mission would test not only their courage, but the very foundations of loyalty, duty, and justice that had governed Valdoria for over 3 centuries. Part 4. King Marcus returned from the agricultural summit on Thursday afternoon, his motorcade arriving at the palace under unusually heavy security due to intelligence reports about potential protests in the capital. Elena watched from her post near the main entrance as the king emerged from his vehicle, noting the exhaustion in his bearing and the troubled expression that had become increasingly common during recent months. General Rodriguez had arranged to meet with King Marcus the following morning, using the routine military briefing schedule to avoid drawing attention to their request for a private audience. Elena spent Thursday evening creating final copies of all evidence and preparing a comprehensive written summary that would help the king understand the full scope of what they had discovered. That night, Elena barely slept. She walked the palace corridors during her security rounds, thinking about how different these familiar halls would feel after tomorrow's revelation. The ornate tapestries, the portraits of previous monarchs, the ceremonial weapons displayed in glass cases, all of it represented a tradition that was under attack from within the royal family itself. Friday morning arrived gray and rainy, the weather matching Elena's somber mood as she made her way to the war room where General Rodriguez would present their evidence to King Marcus. She was not scheduled to attend the meeting directly, but Rodriguez had arranged for her to wait in an adjacent conference room, ready to provide additional details or answer questions about the surveillance evidence. At precisely 9 o'clock, Elena heard King Marcus's voice in the corridor discussing routine matters with his private secretary. The king's tone was relaxed, even cheerful, suggesting he had no suspicion of what awaited him. Elena felt a pang of guilt, knowing that the next hour would shatter his peace and force him to confront betrayal from the people he trusted most. General Rodriguez began the briefing with standard military reports, easing into the serious revelations gradually to avoid shocking the king too severely. Elena could hear fragments of conversation through the connecting door, Rodriguez's formal tones, mixed with occasional questions from King Marcus. After 20 minutes of routine discussion, Rodriguez's voice took on a more serious quality. Your Majesty, there is one additional matter that requires your immediate attention. It concerns Prince Alexander's upcoming military service and certain irregularities in the decision-making process surrounding that service. A pause followed, then King Marcus's voice, tinged with curiosity rather than concern. What kind of irregularities, General? Elena's heart pounded as she listened to Rodriguez begin revealing their discoveries. Sire, over the past several weeks, palace security has uncovered evidence of a coordinated effort to manipulate Prince Alexander's attitudes toward military service and, more broadly, toward traditional royal responsibilities. The quality of silence from the war room changed, becoming tense and electric. Elena could imagine King Marcus's expression shifting from casual interest to sharp attention as the implications of Rodriguez's words began to register. General, please be more specific, the king said, his voice now carrying the formal authority he used during serious state discussions. Rodriguez's response was measured and careful. Your Majesty, we have audio recordings and documentary evidence proving that Queen Mother Isabella and Lord Chancellor Dmitri have been working together to prevent Prince Alexander from completing his military service, using deception and psychological manipulation to achieve this goal. The explosion of sound from the war room, a chair scraping violently across the floor, footsteps pacing rapidly back and forth, told Elena that King Marcus was struggling to process this accusation against his mother and closest friend. That's impossible! The king's voice came through the wall, strained with disbelief. My mother and Dmitri would never— General, you're accusing 2 of the most respected members of this court of treason against royal tradition. I hope you have extraordinary evidence to support such claims. Elena heard Rodriguez's calm response. Yes, Your Majesty, I do. What followed was 45 minutes of audio playback, with Rodriguez providing context for each recording and explaining how the evidence had been obtained. Elena listened as King Marcus's voice went through stages of shock, disbelief, anger, and finally a cold fury that she had never heard from the normally mild-mannered monarch. When Isabella's voice filled the war room describing her manipulation of Alexander's education and her plans to use Dr. Torres to fabricate medical reasons for avoiding military service, King Marcus's response was a string of curses that would have been shocking from anyone, let alone from the dignified ruler of Valdoria. "Stop the recording," the king commanded after hearing Isabella dismiss his own military service as damaging to his leadership abilities. "General, how long has this surveillance been ongoing?" Rodriguez's answer was precise. The initial discovery occurred 8 days ago during routine security rounds. We have continued surveillance since then to determine the full scope of the conspiracy and ensure we had comprehensive evidence before bringing this matter to your attention. "Who else knows about this?" King Marcus asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Myself and Captain Elena Marquez from Palace Security." Captain Marquez made the initial discovery and has been instrumental in documenting the extent of the conspiracy. She is waiting in the adjacent conference room and can provide additional details about the evidence collection process. Elena heard her name called and entered the war room to find King Marcus standing rigid behind his chair, his usually composed features twisted with a mixture of rage and grief. The recordings had forced him to confront not just a political conspiracy, but a personal betrayal by the two people he had trusted most completely. "Captain Marquez," the king said, his voice strained but controlled, "General Rodriguez tells me you discovered this conspiracy accidentally during security rounds." "Yes, Your Majesty," Elena replied formally. "I observed an unauthorized meeting in the Queen Mother's study during my midnight inspection. When I heard voices discussing plans to prevent Prince Alexander's military service, I felt obligated to investigate further." King Marcus studied her face intently. "Captain, you realize that what you've uncovered will destroy my family and create a crisis that could destabilize the monarchy itself." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Your Majesty, I also realize that failing to report this conspiracy would have allowed Prince Alexander to be manipulated and deceived by people who claim to love him. The evidence shows that the Queen Mother's plans extend far beyond military service. She's attempting to control his entire development as a future leader." The king's nod was barely perceptible, but Elena saw acknowledgement in his eyes. "You're right, of course. Personal comfort cannot take precedence over truth and justice, no matter how much it hurts to face that truth." General Rodriguez spoke carefully. "Your Majesty, we need to consider our response options. The Queen Mother and Lord Chancellor are planning to implement their deception within the next 10 days. If we're going to stop them, we need to act quickly." King Marcus walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, staring out at the grounds where generations of his family had walked and made decisions that shaped Valdorian history. When he turned back to face them, his expression had hardened into the mask of royal authority that Elena had rarely seen him wear. "General Rodriguez, I want you to arrange immediate private meetings with Dr. Torres, Professor Vasquez, and Lord Chamberlain Delgado. Each of them will be informed that their cooperation with any efforts to manipulate Prince Alexander's schedule, education, or medical status will result in immediate dismissal and possible criminal charges. They are to report any such requests directly to you." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Captain Marquez, I want you to continue monitoring the Queen Mother's activities, but with additional support from senior security staff. If she attempts to implement any aspect of her plan, I want immediate notification." "Understood, sire." King Marcus paused, clearly struggling with the personal aspects of what he had to do next. "I will confront my mother and Dmitri directly this afternoon. They will be informed that their conspiracy has been discovered and that any further attempts to manipulate Alexander or subvert royal traditions will result in their permanent banishment from court." Elena felt both relief and apprehension. The king was taking decisive action to protect his son and preserve royal traditions, but confronting Isabella and Dmitri directly might drive the conspiracy underground rather than eliminating it entirely. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, If the Queen Mother and Lord Chancellor realize they've been discovered, they might attempt to implement their plans immediately or develop alternative strategies we haven't anticipated. King Marcus's eyes sharpened with understanding. You're recommending we allow them to proceed until they commit acts we can prosecute more definitively. I'm recommending we ensure they can't escape consequences by claiming their conversations were merely theoretical discussions rather than active conspiracy, Elena replied. If we wait until they actually attempt to use Dr. Torres to falsify medical records or officially request cancellation of Prince Alexander's military service, their criminal intent becomes undeniable. General Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Captain Marquez raises a valid tactical consideration, Your Majesty. Confronting them before they act might result in denials and counter-accusations that could create political complications. King Marcus considered this advice carefully, weighing justice against family preservation, public stability against personal satisfaction. Finally, he made the decision that would define his reign's legacy. We proceed with surveillance and evidence gathering, he decided. The Queen Mother and Lord Chancellor will be allowed to implement their plan up to the point where they actually commit crimes against the crown. At that moment, they will be arrested and prosecuted to the full extent of royal law. Elena realized that King Marcus had just committed to a course of action that would result in his own mother and closest advisor facing criminal charges for treason. The personal cost of this decision was enormous, but the king understood that his duty to the monarchy and to his son's future took precedence over family loyalty. The war room fell silent as all three of them contemplated the implications of what would happen over the next week. They had moved beyond investigation into active counter-conspiracy, setting a trap that would either save Prince Alexander's autonomy or destroy the royal family in the attempt. Outside the window, palace life continued normally, with staff members and visitors going about their daily routines, completely unaware that the monarchy's future hung in the balance of a secret battle between truth and manipulation, tradition and innovation, family loyalty and justice. Elena left the meeting knowing that she had helped set in motion events that would change Valdoria forever, one way or another. Part 5. The trap was set with military precision. Over the weekend, General Rodriguez quietly briefed key security personnel about the need for enhanced monitoring of senior royal family member activities, framing the increased surveillance as a response to general security concerns rather than a specific investigation. With trust steady, Elena coordinated with the team to ensure comprehensive coverage of Isabella's movements and communications. Dr. Torres was the first to fall into the snare that King Marcus had authorized. On Monday morning, the royal physician requested a private meeting with Prince Alexander, ostensibly for a routine health evaluation. Elena, now working directly under the king's authority, arranged for the medical consultation to be recorded through security devices in the royal medical suite. The conversation unfolded exactly as Isabella and Dimitri had planned. Dr. Torres performed a cursory examination of Alexander, then expressed carefully manufactured concern about certain cardiovascular readings that required further investigation. Your Highness, the physician said with practiced gravity, I'm detecting some irregularities in your heart rhythm that weren't present during your last comprehensive examination. While these may be entirely benign, the stress and physical demands of naval service could exacerbate any underlying condition. Elena watched through security monitors as Prince Alexander's face registered confusion and worry. The young man had no reason to doubt his physician's assessment, and Isabella's months of subtle conditioning had prepared him to view military service as a dangerous obligation. Teddy, Dr. Torres, are you saying I might not be medically qualified for naval duty? Alexander asked. I'm saying we need extensive testing to ensure your safety, Torres replied carefully. These tests could take several weeks, possibly months. In my professional opinion, it would be irresponsible to proceed with military service until we have a complete understanding of your cardiovascular status. Elena felt sick as she watched Dr. Torres lie to the prince's face, knowing that this conversation would provide the evidence needed to prosecute him for medical fraud and conspiracy. Alexander trusted his physician completely, accepting the fabricated diagnosis without question because he had no reason to suspect deception from someone sworn to protect his health. The recording captured every detail of Torres's deception, including his specific recommendations for delaying military service and his assurance that the Queen Mother would help explain the situation to King Marcus. Elena immediately transmitted copies of the recording to General Rodriguez and King Marcus, providing real-time documentation of the conspiracy's implementation. 2 days later, Lord Chancellor Dmitri made the next move in Isabella's carefully orchestrated plan. He requested an official meeting with King Marcus to discuss what he presented as urgent concerns about Prince Alexander's readiness for military service. Elena was positioned in the anteroom adjacent to the king's private office during this meeting, recording the conversation while King Marcus played his role as an unsuspecting father concerned about his son's welfare. "Your Majesty," Dmitri began formally, "Dr. Torres has brought certain medical concerns to my attention regarding Prince Alexander's upcoming naval commission. The royal physician believes that previously undetected cardiovascular irregularities make military service potentially dangerous for His Highness. King Marcus's performance was flawless. Medical concerns? Dmitri, Alexander has always been in excellent health. What kind of irregularities are we discussing? Heart rhythm abnormalities that could be exacerbated by the physical stress of naval training," Dmitri explained, repeating Torres' fabricated diagnosis. "Dr. Torres recommends postponing military service indefinitely, while specialists conduct comprehensive testing to determine the exact nature and severity of these irregularities." Elena could hear the carefully controlled emotion in King Marcus's voice as he responded. "This is the first I'm hearing of any health issues. When did these irregularities appear?" The doctor detected them during Alexander's routine pre-service examination, Dmitri lied smoothly. "He wanted to conduct additional tests before raising concerns with you, but the findings have convinced him that proceeding with naval service would be medically irresponsible." King Marcus asked several probing questions, giving Dmitri multiple opportunities to elaborate on the deception and provide detailed evidence of his knowing participation in the conspiracy. Elena recorded every word, building an airtight case for prosecution of the Lord Chancellor for fraud and conspiracy against the crown. The most damning moment came when Dmitri volunteered additional details that he couldn't possibly have known without prior coordination with Isabella and Torres. "Your Majesty, the Queen Mother has already spoken with Prince Alexander about these health concerns," Dmitri revealed. "Her Majesty helped explain to His Highness that postponing military service would be a wise precaution rather than a failure of duty. Alexander understands that protecting his long-term health serves the kingdom's interests." This statement proved not only Dmitri's participation in the conspiracy, but also his knowledge of Isabella's psychological manipulation of Alexander. Elena realized they now had comprehensive evidence of coordination between all three primary conspirators. On Thursday evening, Isabella made her final move by requesting a private family meeting with King Marcus and Prince Alexander to discuss the medical situation that required adjusting the prince's military service timeline. Elena positioned recording equipment throughout the family's private sitting room, ensuring capture of what she knew would be the conspiracy's culminating moment. The meeting began with Isabella presenting herself as a concerned grandmother worried about her grandson's health and long-term welfare. She had coached Alexander thoroughly, and the prince unknowingly played his part perfectly, expressing genuine concern about the cardiovascular issues that Dr. Torres had fabricated. "Marcus," Isabella said with masterful emotional manipulation, "as a mother, I cannot stand by and watch my grandson risk his health for the sake of tradition. Yes, military service has been a royal custom, but our first duty is to protect Alexander's life and future. These heart irregularities could be fatal if ignored." Elena watched King Marcus struggle to maintain his composure as his mother expertly pushed every emotional button designed to override his rational judgment. Isabella understood her son's psychology perfectly, using his love for Alexander and his respect for medical authority to support her deception. "Mother, if Dr. Torres believes military service is medically inadvisable, then obviously we must postpone Alexander's commission," King Marcus replied, his voice carefully neutral. However, I want independent medical opinions from specialists outside the royal medical staff. Isabella's momentary flash of alarm told Elena that this request hadn't been anticipated in their planning. Marcus, surely you trust Dr. Torres's professional judgment. He's served our family faithfully for over a decade. Of course I trust Torres, the king replied smoothly. But when dealing with potential life-threatening conditions, multiple expert opinions are standard medical practice. Elena realized that King Marcus was extending the trap, giving the conspirators additional opportunities to deepen their deception while making their eventual prosecution even more comprehensive. Independent medical examinations would prove that Alexander's heart was perfectly healthy, providing definitive evidence of Dr. Torres's fraud. Prince Alexander, still believing he was suffering from a serious medical condition, agreed readily to additional testing. His genuine cooperation in the investigative process that would ultimately expose his grandmother's manipulation. The meeting concluded with Isabella believing she had successfully convinced King Marcus to postpone Alexander's military service based on fabricated medical concerns. She had no idea that every word of her manipulation had been recorded and would soon be presented as evidence in criminal proceedings. Friday morning, King Marcus activated the final phase of their counter-conspiracy. General Rodriguez arrived at the palace with a detail of military police and formal arrest warrants for Queen Mother Isabella, Lord Chancellor Dmitri, and royal physician Sebastian Torres. Elena accompanied the arrest team to Isabella's chambers, where they found the Queen Mother reviewing correspondence at her writing desk. The scene would remain etched in Elena's memory forever, the moment when centuries of royal dignity collided with the reality of criminal justice. Isabella Corvelli, Queen Mother of Valdoria, General Rodriguez announced formally. You are under arrest for conspiracy against the crown, manipulation of royal family members, and treason against royal traditions and protocols. Isabella's initial reaction was shock, followed quickly by imperious outrage. General, you are clearly exceeding your authority. I demand to speak with my son immediately. Your son, His Majesty King Marcus, has authorized these arrests based on comprehensive evidence of your criminal conspiracy. Rodriguez replied calmly. You have the right to remain silent and to request legal representation. As the reality of her situation penetrated, Isabella's facade of aristocratic control began to crumble. You have no idea what you're destroying, she hissed at Elena and Rodriguez. I was protecting Alexander from the same military brutality that damaged his father. I was ensuring this kingdom would have a king capable of modern leadership rather than ancient warrior traditions. Elena felt no satisfaction in watching the Queen Mother's arrest, only sadness that someone who genuinely loved Prince Alexander had allowed that love to corrupt her judgment so completely. Isabella truly believed her conspiracy was beneficial, making her downfall tragic rather than simply criminal. Dmitri and Dr. Torres were arrested simultaneously in their respective offices, neither offering significant resistance once confronted with audio evidence of their participation in the conspiracy. The Lord Chancellor maintained dignified silence, but Torres attempted to justify his medical fraud as protective of Alexander's psychological well-being. Prince Alexander learned the truth during an emergency family meeting that afternoon, as King Marcus played selected portions of the conspiracy recordings for his son. Elena watched through security monitors as the young prince's worldview shattered and reformed in real time. Grandmother was lying to me about everything? Alexander asked, his voice hollow with disbelief. Not everything, King Marcus replied gently. She genuinely loves you and believes she was acting in your best interests. But yes, she was manipulating your education, your social interactions, your understanding of royal duty, and your medical care to prevent you from developing independence and traditional royal values. Elena saw the exact moment when Alexander understood the full scope of his grandmother's deception. The prince had to confront not only Isabella's lies, but also his own complicity in accepting those lies without question. Father, I want to proceed with my naval commission as originally scheduled, Alexander said firmly. I need to discover who I am without grandmother's influence, and I need to prove to myself and the kingdom that I can honor our traditions with integrity." King Marcus nodded approvingly. "Your commission will proceed as planned, Alexander. General Rodriguez has assured me that the HMS Valdorian Pride is ready for your arrival, and Captain Morrison is prepared to treat you exactly like any other naval cadet." 3 weeks later, Elena stood on the dock watching Prince Alexander board the naval vessel that would transform him from a sheltered royal into a seasoned leader. The young man who walked up the gangplank bore little resemblance to the uncertain, manipulated prince she had observed just a month earlier. Alexander paused at the ship's rail and looked back at the small group of family and officials who had come to see him off. His gaze found Elena among the crowd, and he nodded slightly, acknowledged of the role she had played in preserving his autonomy and protecting his future. As the HMS Valdorian Pride sailed out of harbor, Elena reflected on the events that had transformed her from a simple security guard into a guardian of royal tradition and truth. The conspiracy had been exposed. The conspirators faced justice, and Prince Alexander was free to develop into the leader Valdoria needed rather than the puppet Isabella had tried to create. The monarchy survived, strengthened by the knowledge that truth and tradition could prevail even against manipulation from within the royal family itself. Elena returned to her security duties with a deeper understanding of what it meant to protect not just royal lives, but royal integrity. In the months that followed, Prince Alexander's naval service would prove that the ancient traditions had wisdom that transcended any individual's political preferences. The young man who returned from his military commission would be prepared to lead Valdoria with both strength and compassion, having learned to trust his own judgment while respecting the institutions that had guided his kingdom for centuries. Elena's midnight discovery had ultimately saved not just a prince, but a principle. That truth and tradition deserve protection even when family loyalty demands silence.